Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Fashion Forum panel, brought to you by LA Textile and Fashiondex.com. My name's Andrea Kennedy from Fashiondex.com, and I'm really excited to welcome you to an interactive conversation on sustainability and fashion. We're thrilled and honored and grateful today to have three amazing speakers with us. Dana Davis is the VP of Sustainability, Product and Strategy at Mara Hoffman. Eszter Csicsai is the Manager of Member Engagement of the Americas for the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And Simone Cipriani is Chief Technical Advisor for the Ethical Fashion Initiative. Thank you all so much for being with us, Dana, Eszter, and Simone. My name's Andrea Kennedy, and I'm thrilled to have Mary Harrelson with me today to help co-moderate questions from all of you. Mary is a fashion marketing major and sustainability minor. She's a senior at LAM College. If you have questions for any of the speakers today, you can put it in the chat box or in the Q&A box. No need to put it in both. We'll be checking both. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us. And Dana, Eszter, and Simone, welcome, and thanks for being here. If you could each take about a minute or so to introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do at either Mara Hoffman, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, or the Ethical Fashion Initiative, what sustainability looks like there, and what your role is. So thanks. Want to start us off, Dana?
Sure. Thanks, Andrea and Mary, for having me. Hello to everyone. Let's see, under a minute to answer all of those things. So as Andrea mentioned, I work for the contemporary brand Mara Hoffman. My role, for the sake of this conversation, I'll really focus in on the sustainability side. So the brand is actually just celebrated our 20-year anniversary. We're a privately owned women's wear brand, and about 6 years ago, we really had a big pivotal moment where we transitioned the whole company to focus on the people and the planet. And within that, my role is on the production side. So looking at the collection offerings and looking at from the material aspect, transparency into our supply chain, which I'm sure we'll get further into. We have a large stance in manufacturing in the US. And, you know, we really also like to push the conversation with our consumer to get them to really evaluate their relationship with clothing and how they wear our pieces and how they think about what they're purchasing and why they're purchasing something and how to create longevity within that garment. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Love that. And I love that your mission is longevity. Thanks, Eszter.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me so much. As Andrea mentioned, I am Eszter Csicsai. I'm the Manager of Member Engagement for the Americas region here at the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the SAC, it is an industry-wide group of leading apparel and footwear brands, retailers, manufacturers, non-governmental organizations, academic experts, and government organizations working to reduce the environmental and social impacts of the industry around the world. So we've just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and it's really been a fantastic decade of SAC members collaborating to develop a shared language for sustainability measurement, which is today known as the Higg Index suite of tools, which enables companies of all types and sizes and at every stage in their sustainability journey to accurately measure and score a company or product sustainability performance. So in my role, I have the pleasure of working directly with all of our SAC members in North and South America, which is a very active region. We have over 100 companies represented. So I work with our member companies to understand and implement our very ambitious membership requirements and to make sure that members are taking advantage of these requirements and the tools and the network they have access to develop a solid foundation for environmental and social sustainability improvement. So whether that means working with a brand that's a new member company to strategize how to get internal buy-in for their sustainability plans driven by the Higg Index, or whether that means working with a longer time member who is showing true leadership to reach even further in their transparency and communications efforts, or to share their knowledge with other members for whom they are a really great example. I'm lucky enough to have the task of making sure that all of our members are plugged in, engaged, and receiving guidance and support they need to optimize their sustainability planning and outcomes, in a nutshell.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eszter. And Simone.
Hey there, I am Simone Cipriani. As you see, a poor old man with the beard of Santa Claus who manages the Ethical Fashion Initiative, which is a program of the UN. We are two or three things. We are a giant supply chain that enables artisans, mostly women artisans, from very marginalized conditions who live in countries affected by war, by conflict, by extreme poverty in Africa, but also in Afghanistan, to become regular suppliers of international brands and distributors. We are, in every country where we work, we have a whole structure with a social enterprise that coordinates the work of a huge network of cooperatives and this and that. Our customers are some of the big names in the industry. You mentioned many of the big names, and they are there in our portfolio. We make fabric, we make bags, we make several accessories. Sometimes we try to make sandals and shoes. Sometimes we make them well, sometimes we do not. And we also make some garments in some places. We also make something for interiors. The second thing we are a program that runs an accelerator for emerging African fashion brands, accelerating them, mentoring them, finding investors to invest in them. And that's the second area of work. Then we are also producers of theatrical shows and short movies, because by doing this, we mentor the creativity of the places where we work, and we enable the artisans to work not only with fashion people, but also with people from the arts. And this is a form of enrichment for their capacities. Last but not least, I am the chairperson of the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion, which joins together all the agencies of the UN that in a way or another support sustainable fashion. And I must confess that I met some fantastic people in this alliance, really colleagues that are really devoted to the cause of sustainability, much beyond my expectations. I'm the worst one in that group. They're all better than me. So that's what I do.
Thank you all so much. Those introductions were terrific. I just want to remind all of our attendees, and we're so thrilled that you're all here, that if you have a question for our expert panel, type it in the Q&A box or the chat box on any question on how you can implement sustainability, responsibility, ethical production, at your company, your line, your brand, or your organization. But I'm going to start us off and kick us off with two questions about sourcing. Since LA Textile is a sourcing show and many of you come to source, you know, when I went to school and all of you went to school, we were kind of taught that when we're sourcing fabrics and trims and factories, we say like, how cheap is it? And how fast can we get it? So, but if you want to really source for sustainability in mind, you have to ask different questions. So how can you help the designers, merchandisers, brands that are here today and source more sustainable materials? What should they be asking? And who wants to start? Dana, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start. So I think even just asking questions in general is that you're going in the right direction, right? So instead of just asking about the price or lead times or minimums, it's truly asking questions about the process. But before you get to that stage, you need to also decide what's going to live within your material portfolio. So what are the fibers as a brand that you're committed to? And maybe you won't know those yet, and that will evolve, and that's okay. But you need to research those fibers and understand the processes that go into first, you know, manufacturing the fibers, but then getting into the final stage of the fabric itself. So when we started this journey 6 years ago, and I say journey because it is forever a journey and something that you're not all of a sudden going to be a sustainable brand. Let's be honest, right? There's like no such thing as that. We're still going to be in a take, make model, but we can make smarter choices as we go. So for us, it's sitting down with the supplier, understanding what part of the supply chain they actually own, right? So are they a vertical operation? And, and that would mean that they do all parts of it in-house, or what are they sending out? So the way we approach it is, once we have these materials selected, we send out to the supplier a material data sheet. And within that sheet, it breaks down each part of that process that goes into making that fabric. And then we're requesting through that, who is the person, where are they located, a factory profile within that, what types of certifications do they have? And that kind of gets the ball rolling, and also gets the supplier to know that you're committed to transparency. And I think once you start with that, there's also a different way that they're going to communicate with you, understanding that where your values lie. So that's kind of our initial approach. I can go a little bit further into then how we kind of score our materials internally, but I think that's really kind of up to the brand and how they're going to approach that. I'll pass that one on, but I think getting started is just really about getting to that transparency aspect, is a really great start.
Great, thank you so much, Dana. Love that. Eszter, did you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that before even knowing what questions to ask, that there's a lot of preparatory work that has to be done. I think it's very, very important for a company, as Dana said, to know yourself and to know your operations, to know your supply chain. That's extremely basic, so that there's a whole world of goals that you can aspire to. And so you have to know what you'll be able to reach, and most importantly, what's most critical before you start asking any questions. So taking it several steps back, the recommendation would be to start with something like performing a very robust environmental and social risk assessment on your company. So you have to identify the most salient risks posed by your operations to the environment and to the humans throughout your value chain. And that will give you these extremely compelling and real goals to work toward. And then you can build strategy and questions working backward from the standpoint of mitigating your most critical risks. So before you even decide, am I focusing on material sourcing? Am I focusing on packaging? Am I focusing, what changes am I trying to make? You have to know, what are the biggest risks that you need to do something about immediately? What's on fire now in your company? And then work backwards from that. And I would also add to that it's very important, as you're building out your strategy, once you've identified these risks, to make sure that as you're asking questions, you have a standardized framework and an industry approved framework to hang all of your answers and your strategy on. So obviously here, I would say the HIG Index suite of tools developed by the SAC, that's certainly one example of an industry developed standardized suite of tools that can help you not only connect your risks to actionable next steps, but also to get score readouts on how you're doing in certain areas, and also to have a pathway forward for improvement. So the questions that you ask will evolve over time, and it's important to be able to connect those directly back to the risks you're trying to mitigate, the goals that you've set, and then also to be able to compare the outputs to your industry peers. So it's never really as simple as what is one great question to ask. It's also about what's the strategy behind that question, and where are you trying to get with it. You also have to know who your suppliers are, as Dana said. And so mapping your entire global value chain using, again, trusted industry approaches is extremely important.
Got to start with that mapping. Thanks, Eszter. Simone, do you have anything to add to that, please?
Well, not much. You framed it perfectly, Dana and Eszter. Yeah, mapping, we use something like an ethical sourcing matrix through which we map all the potential risks in the supply chain. We do it with suppliers. It's a collaborative exercise that you do with suppliers for the sake of transparency and of involvement of suppliers in your ethical agenda. And this is about risk mapping, which is, again, extremely important. When you work in places where labor standards are enforced, the law about labor is enforced, you don't have big problems in that area. But if you work with a supplier that is based in a country where labor legislation is not so strong or is not completely enforced, you have to devote particular attention to the risks related to labor conditions. And so what you have already said, all the main international conditions, not discrimination, overtime, compensation, blah, 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 health and safety, and living wage. Where you do not have a serious labor legislation, or where it is not enforced, living wage is a great tool to see who does what and if people are treated fairly or not. Keep in mind that living wage is an objective. It's not the starting point. You start from where the level of salary is, and then you build on it by also investing in people in order to develop their productivity and in order to enable them to achieve that level of remuneration of the living wage. So if your suppliers agrees to engage with you in this wage ladder, to climb up this ladder together, this is already a very good point. And then you are right, or you already said it, the environmental risks, and I would add also the carbon content of the work we do with that specific suppliers. Today, you have organizations that allow you to do an assessment, a serious carbon assessment of what you do, and to also measure your efforts towards decarbonization by using biomaterials, by using transport wisely and all the rest. Let's not forget that I think 65% of the carbon footprint of the industry is not in transport, but in transformation of raw materials in the making. So the sourcing is the place where we have to reduce our carbon footprint in order to have a sustainable future and to remain on the 1.5 degree of increasing global warming defined by the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement has come back into big fashion because the US have rejoined with the new administration the Paris Agreement, and with the US back, the word of sustainability is much stronger. Really, this is one of the best news of this beginning of 2021.
Agreed, absolutely, preach. So glad. And then with those UN, with that 1.5 degree, we can, have science-based targets as part of our goal. I'm so glad you mentioned collaboration. It's so important to really have those conversations and do this together. But I'm going to toss it right now to Mary because I am just seeing so many questions. I haven't even read them all, but there's a lot of questions. So take it away, Mary.
Yes, we have an incredibly interactive audience today. It's wonderful. Eszter, we're going to start with you. There's a few attendees who would like to hear more about what the Higg Index is and its benefits. Finally, how emerging designers can use the index scoring system and whether it's an affordable option.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I'm happy to give some background on the Higg Index. So the Higg Index suite of tools is an end-to-end sustainability measurement system, which had started out being developed by the apparel, footwear, and textiles value chain, but we really see it as a measurement system that can scale to the global consumer goods industry. And indeed, that is the SAC's new vision in our second decade of action, is really to make this be a system of measurement, verification, and transparency communications that can help move forward the global consumer goods industry. So what it is in practice, we have a set of tools that help you gather standardized data and comparable data to verify that data, to communicate it among value chain partners, and to have transparency communications frameworks and toolkits for it. And so the reason behind that is that to make sure that every step of a product's life cycle, from sourcing to manufacturing to creation, to retail, to use and end of use, that there is data that's being collected and communicated among value chain partners. So there are three areas to the Higg Index suite of tools, three categories. We have facility tools, brand and retailer tools, and then product tools. So at the facility level, we have the facility environmental module, which measures the 7 main environmental impacts of a manufacturing facility. And we have the facility social and labor module, which measures social and labor impacts at the factory level, and whose backbone is based upon the social and labor convergence program's Converge Assessment Framework. At the brand and retailer level, we have the Higg Brand and Retail tool, which aims to help brands and retailers of any size and at any location in their sustainability journey measure and put into action improvement goals. And the brand and retail module is based very much upon this idea of doing these robust risk assessments and then setting your goals from there and creating your internal pathways for improvement in there. At the product level, we have the Higg Material Sustainability Index, which allows you to assess materials and to get an idea of their environmental impacts in 5 main impact categories. And then we also have the HIG product module, which allows for finished product to finished product comparison. Again, assessment of environmental impact in these 5 main areas. And we have so far released the first edition of the product module, which measures cradle to factory gate. And we're about to release the second edition of the product module, which will take the assessment from factory gate all the way through consumer use and end of use. So in this way, this will be the real completion of the core HIG Index suite of tools, which allows for full life cycle impact measurement. And the idea here is to create this common shared language for sustainability measurement across the industry. So it's very hard to make improvements when it's sort of apples to oranges and there's a lot of proprietary systems in place. But we believe if there's one trusted system that can be verified, it's much easier for everybody to make improvements exponentially faster when you can compare yourself to your industry peers in an understandable way, and when you can eventually communicate to consumers in an understandable and comparable way. So that's a basic introduction to the HIG Index suite of tools. And as for, I believe, how SMEs could engage with it, certainly there is, these tools are not available for free, but we have seen a lot of success with SMEs working directly with HIG, who is our technology partner who develops the tools, to use the tools perhaps one by one or use a couple of them at a time as they scale up their usage of the full HIG Index suite of tools. So one point of entry can often be the HIG Material Sustainability Index. So a company who's perhaps just starting out on their journey may want to come in and say, we would like to assess our full materials library. So they can use the MSI to set up an example material library. So they can select the example materials within the MSI. They can add a variety of manufacturing processes that replicate the actual materials they're using, and they can get a full readout of what the footprint is of their materials library, looking at it on an impact by impact basis using LCIA data. So that's certainly one entry point. We also have brands who use the facility tools to start communications with their suppliers. So they can use a facility environmental module to get these relationships and these goal setting conversations going with their suppliers by helping their suppliers get up to speed and using the FEM, and then discussing setting goals and achieving goals together using this year-over-year assessment.
Thank you so much, Eszter. While we're on the topic of materials, quite a few attendees here want to open up the discussion regarding organic cotton and certifications. Specifically, we have one question about whether or not organic cotton really is more sustainable than conventional cotton. There's some conflicting information out there. Dana, do you have anything you'd like to discuss?
Sure. As a brand, we only source organic cotton. I'm not going to get into the metrics behind why, but I think for us, it's a no-brainer that organic cotton is better than conventional cotton, but it is very challenging to source. And when you want to ensure that it is organic, there's a process. You can't just, at face value, be sure that something is organic. So there's a process to ensure chain of custody, right? So first you need to get a certified organic standard to whatever it is you're sourcing. And then you need to ensure that the fiber that you are sourcing is actually organic. So that requires transaction receipts. We only use GOT certified cotton. So there's a kind of a protocol that must be followed within that. But as we know that there is still fraudulent activity that happens in the world of organics, and it is very, very tricky. So we are also trying to figure out what are alternatives to cotton, because yes, it is still, there is a lot of land use and water use still in organic cotton. So I think it's important, again, to kind of understand what are your material goals and then seek out other alternative options. Recycled cotton, is it right? There's really nothing better if you're looking at cotton. So finding mills that have the capability to work with recycled yarns, that's definitely something that we continue to strive towards. And we're really excited to keep moving in the direction and getting to 100% recycled cotton in the very near future. So yeah, it's, I think as far as though organic to conventional, and that I think Textile Exchange is a great place to start. Go there. There's a fact section, I believe, on their site. It's open source. You can go take a look and you can literally look at the difference between land use, water use, chemicals. It's all there. So check that out, definitely.
Great. Thank you, Dana. And thank you to all of our attendees for asking so many wonderful questions. Simone, it's been a little while since we've heard from you. Since we're talking about organic cotton farming, do you want to discuss details of how we can work on our labor practices in the realm of farming for the fashion industry?
Labor practices in farming for the fashion industry is a huge discussion because you have different conditions everywhere in the world. Basically, the principles of fair labor and the principle of living wage applies to everywhere. In a factory or in a farming community, organic cotton contributes to good labor practices because not using pesticides and fertilizers, you don't practically poison people in the rural communities where farming happens. I am also a great supporter of organic cotton for all the reasons mentioned by Dana, but also for this, because it allows people also to avoid depletion of the soil, and therefore it allows farming communities. I have in mind the farming communities in Africa where I work, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, huge producers of cotton. The majority of the cotton of Burkina Faso is exported. But organic cotton allows farmers to also grow other crops that are food crops that are very useful for them, that can improve their diet and the intake of calories or vitamin and all the rest. Organic cotton is much beyond the simple application of good farming practices in terms of labor. This is fine. It's the same fair labor criteria, but it allows farmers also to have a richer diet and to have cleaner water, to live in a cleaner environment. It's something extremely important. And on the use of water, water is so important in organic cotton. Cotton consumes a lot of water to grow and to be transformed, but it depends on where you grow your cotton also. Cotton grown in Western Africa, for instance, is pluvial cotton. You don't have irrigation. The cotton that we have, whose fiber is a bit shorter, for instance, of the Egyptian cotton or of the Uzbek cotton or of the American cotton, but this cotton is pluvial. The irrigation is non-existent or minimal or very, very, very low. And so the content of water needed to grow this cotton is much lower than the content of water needed in other places where they need a lot of irrigation. In transformation, when you use cotton, you use water. Even if you do natural dyes, even if you use natural dyes as we do, you use water for the dyes. So the effluent treatment systems and the circularity of the water you use is absolutely important, absolutely important. Check that your suppliers have these things in place. Circularity in the use of water and good water effluent treatment plants. A very last point on recycling, I agree with Dana. You can also use recycled cotton, which is very good. Recycling requires water again, a lot of water. When you grind all the fiber and then you reproduce it and then you wash it many, many, many times and you use a lot of water. Again, there's a solution to this, which is the circularity of the use of water through good effluent treatment plants. I was born, as you see from the color of my beard, many years ago in a place in Tuscany, which was specialized in recycling fibers. And over the years, because of the heavy use of water, they created these incredible treatment plants and they always reuse more or less the same water. So these are all issues related to this.
Thank you, Simone. While we're talking about recycling, Selah has a question regarding real clothing recycle programs that are available to small businesses. We've seen them for some of the larger companies, but what is available to the smaller businesses to participate in? And furthermore, is there anyone who would like to discuss the emerging technology to split synthetic fibers apart for recycling? Dana, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. So love a good take back program, but I think it's important to remember, right, that we should keep our clothes circular mode for as long as possible at the current state, right? So recycling for us is kind of like the last option. So the way that we approach it at Mara Hoffman, we have a take back program. We partner with the renewal workshop. We repair the garments, we wash them, we resell them. If we're looking at something that maybe is really truly there, it's no longer able to be used, it's many years old, then if we want to talk about recycling, that's something that we'll do. But I think it's very important to remember that, because the innovation, it goes hand in hand, right, Mary? So that question, it's very important to know that, yes, we are not in a place where innovation is caught up to the scale that we need it and the amount that the customer is actually consuming. So a really tricky area for us when we speak about recycling is in our swimwear. So you have a high content of spandex in that. There is no way to recycle that mechanically, which is hopefully what we would be doing, versus a chemical recycling ability. And even on a chemical level, there has not been much success in extracting that amount of spandex and then actually utilizing that spandex. So it is becoming just waste. So even though maybe they're taking out the polyester or the nylon and they're able to put that into a circular system, there's still a lot of waste generated in there. So I always say, look at recycling as your last option. So first look at how much can you keep that. And there's so many options, right? As a brand, small brand, you can partner with ThredUp, RealReal, Poshmark. You can start your own peer-to-peer community on Facebook around how to swap clothes. And then looking at, we've seen now, I feel like there's been so many amazing brands, really, especially through this pandemic, being spotlighted around taking waste, what one calls waste, right, and upcycling it into something super beautiful. So for us, again, recycling last option. But if you're in that place, there are we have to recycle maybe some of our scraps. We work with Fab Scrap in New York, who picks up our internal textile waste. We work with some others in other regions that we manufacture. In Italy, as Simone said, it's inherent to the way that they work. In Como, where we work with a recycled cashmere and a recycled wool, a much easier process in the natural fiber space. Talk to your manufacturers. Also, what are they doing? And also continue to reach out to other brands. If they are making the claims that they are recycling, ask them how they are doing it, who they are working with.
Thank you. I love everything you just said there. Upcycling and making it something beautiful. Let's all be more creative. But speaking of waste, Paula brought up a great point. We're going to backtrack a little bit into packaging. It's a huge problem, especially now with so many of us receiving our products as consumers shipped straight to our door. Eszter, do you have any suggestions on what the best alternatives are to the individual garment plastic shipping bags, and whether or not bio bags are a real solution?
Well, yeah, as with this question, as with any question, there's not really one simple answer as yes, use this, use paper instead, get rid of your packaging, lightweight your packaging. There are so many options out there, and they all really depend on, again, what your overall sustainability strategy is. So if there's one point that I drive home today, it's that you can't do one thing without understanding how it fits into your overall operations. So I would say it's really important before switching out your existing packaging to understand what the exact impacts of that packaging are and how improving upon that would fit in with your overall sustainability strategy. So do you have a water usage goal? Do you have a carbon reduction goal? Do you have, what are the goals that you've set? And so using tools, to go back to the HIG index again, using tools like the material sustainability index, for instance. So it's possible to create a packaging library in there, and by assembling, your example packaging in there, whether it's a hanger, whether it's a hang tag, whether it's a bio bag, whether it's a poly bag, you can understand in 5 different impact categories, such as chemistry, greenhouse gas emissions, water scarcity, what actual real world impacts of using a certain amount of that material or that packaging are. Then you can tie that to your overall strategy and compare different items. So if you use a different material or a different manufacturing process or a different type of packaging, does that reduce your water scarcity score? Does that reduce your greenhouse gas emissions score? Of course, I think everybody would agree that to some extent, getting rid of more and more packaging is better. But if you're going to be replacing it, it's really important to educate yourself on the overall impacts of any alternative packaging you may be using, because it may have inadvertent environmental impacts that you're not aware of because you're so focused on just getting rid of something or replacing something or having something to communicate out to your consumers about, it can come with negative impacts if you're not fully aware. And of course, not everybody is an LCA expert. And so it can be hard to sort of find an entryway into understanding these exact impacts. But again, having a strategy in place, understanding your risks and your goals, and then using a tool such as the MSI to zero in on particular environmental goals can be a really great first step.
I want to throw out a good resource also on that one for any brand or consumer who's looking at this. Prana launched the responsible packaging movement, and that's open for any brand, and it's open sourced, and there's supplier sharing that's happening. We were one of the signing members, and we've been focusing in packaging for quite some time. So I think it's important to get in there and collaborate with other brands who've been doing this work also.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I'm so incredibly grateful to have learned so much about all of these topics from my professor, Andrea Kennedy. Do you have anything you would like to add on this?
In terms of packaging, I think that, as Eszter said, it's ultimately to remove it, removes a lot of the impacts. So, you know, can you just take away poly bags, fold them all up, one piece of tissue into an envelope? That's, I always think, the best solution is to take it away if you want to lower those impacts. But while I have a list of questions, but there's so many here that we're going to stick with questions from the attendees. But Craig is asking, he's launching a custom menswear company specializing in leather. But I know other than apparel, we also have a lot of footwear and accessory people here today also working in leather. So what about leather as it pertains to sustainability when we're talking about impacts in terms of tanning, leather, vegan leather? You know, if anybody wants to tell really what vegan leather is or is not, etc. So who wants to start with leather? Simone, do you want to chat about leather a little bit, please?
Mamma mia, leather seems to be the course of my life. I started in leather years ago, and I started in shoes. Huge problematic area of work. Of course, first of all, the water effluent treatment plants. You have chromium, you have heavy metals. So this is an area of trouble. Be sure wherever you work that the effluents are properly treated. Do not listen to those who say that the kind of chromium-3 that you find in leather doesn't become chromium-0. It's not true. Those heavy metals are dangerous, are bad for the environment, for life, for everything. So those waters have to be treated, and the solid waste, the sludges, because those sludges that you have when you treat water are often full of heavy metals and other stuff. Thanks God, today you have systems to use these sludges and this solid waste in many things, in the construction industry and in many other things. They become materials for other things, but you have to be sure about this. Vegetable tanning. Yeah, you do not have, or chrome-free tanning, heavy metal-free tanning. These are all things that are available today, and they reduce the impact of heavy metals. Check that, they are available, they are possible. But then there is an issue, which is the issue of the origin of the material, the traceability of the hides and the skins that are tanned. In some places, those traceabilities do not exist because there isn't a centralized slaughtering facility, and you know, leather is a byproduct of the meat industry. So if meat is recovered in informal way in many different places, as it happens in many in the countries in the global south, you do not have this traceability, so you do not have a clear idea about the origin and the treatment of the animals. While if there is a centralized facilities, you have this. So leather requires you to be careful with the sourcing. Source from companies that have good environmental systems in place, and if they work in a country where there is an environmental legislation, they have everything, and they have no problem in sharing all data about, for instance, water effluents before entering the factory and going out of the factory. What's in the water before and what's in the water after, where they put the solid waste and how this solid waste is recycled, reused, or whatever, or dumped, because there is a lot of solid waste in leather in the global south, which is dumped into fields. If there is la nappe phréatique, they say in French, how do you say it is in English, with the water in the soil, this water gets contaminated. So all these things are very, very, very important. And the good tannery where you buy has data on this, because almost all the main tanning places have good environmental legislation. So ask for that if you can avoid heavy metal tanning, chrome tanning. Tell the tannery, do you do metal-free tanning? Do you do vegetable tanning? They will tell you, yes, but vegetable tanning is also polluting because you use whatever. Fine, it's true. Even you find many poisons in nature. Nature is not poison-free. But one thing is to treat a natural thing, one thing is to treat and to recover a chemical thing, which is more difficult. So be sure about this when you deal with leather. And then also think about substitutes of leather, recycling plastic, rubber, vegan leather, which is a huge discussion on a huge discussion. Think about substitutes of leather. In the world of today, you have, when I was, again, I always say when I was young, I want to stop saying that, but some years ago, in the fashion industry, shoes, the big brands, it was mainly leather. I remember the days in which the offer of Gucci or of Vuitton in shoes was leather. If it wasn't leather, it was the leather. But today it is not. There's a lot of synthetic materials. There's a lot of alternatives. There's a lot of stuff. Stella McCartney, for whom we worked for many seasons, has been pioneering this, but they all followed up. So you have alternatives. Yes, the alternatives may be things that require industrial processes and chemicals in production. You don't escape from that. So just think, do I really, I'll proceed like this. Do I really need leather? Do I have alternatives? What kind of alternatives? If I really want leather, can I use metal-free, heavy metal-free, or vegetable tanning? And does the tannery have clear records on water treatment, effluent treatment, and solid waste disposal? This is the sort of mini decalogue. It's 8 points, not 10, but it's on how to do with leather. We were speaking about packaging. You are right, Andrea. The less it is, the better it is. Full stop. You can use all the sustainable materials that you want, but if you remove the packaging, you don't have the problem. And if you use packaging, make packaging that can be repurposed. All those dust bags that contain the main bags, when you go to buy a beautiful bag, make them shoppers that people can use. When you get out of a shop, of a boutique with the big bag full of the things that you've bought, this bag must be reused, must be recycled. So it has to be made, it has to be a bit more expensive and made in proper materials. Repurpose, repurpose, repurpose. I remember we make a lot of bags. We've been making bags for 10 years for many brands, but the main one is Vivienne Westwood. Vivienne is an environmental activist and very serious on environment, and I adore her. Vivienne obliges us to use dumped clothing to do the lining of the bag. We go to the markets of second-hand clothing, where all the clothing all the garments that are dumped in Europe arrive in Africa. In Swahili, this material is called mitumba. We go to buy mitumba. Iko mitumba apa? Is there mitumba here? Yes, Iko. Yeah, here it is. And we make this lining of the bags. Those shirts, those pieces of garments have 20 years more of life. Use, repurpose, and eliminate the bloody packaging as more as you can. This civilization of packaging, Madonna, basta, stop it.
Okay, so I'll ask one more and then toss it back to Mary. There's so many great questions here. Who cares about the ones we planned? Amanda is asking, what are some of the best practices to market transitioning your brand from a traditional brand to a sustainable one? And how do you tackle that criticism that comes if you're moving really slowly? Because, you know, it takes a while. So I feel like, Dana, you should take us off on that one, because y'all did that, right?
Yeah, I lead with honesty, right? It doesn't matter where you've been, it's where you're going. And if anybody expects you to do this overnight, then you just need to educate them, right? So maintain forward thinking, but you know, we were in this position and we were led with fear in the beginning, to be honest with you. We were very nervous to speak to these things. Well, what are they going to call us out? We weren't this way in the past. And what if they, you know, want to run our name through the muck? But at some point you have to speak to it. And not just for us, it wasn't a, you know, PR thing. It was to educate the customer. And I got to tell you, 6 years in the world of sustainability, and I'm still confused and learning every day new things. So how can we put the onus on the customer? So if you take the responsibility as a brand to stand up and say, hey, we didn't know these things and we're learning. And as we learn, we're going to take you on this journey with us. And we're going to be open, and we prefer constructive feedback versus, you know, being called out. But sometimes call culture also helps us move in the right directions. So, you know, I just say leading with honesty and, you know, just continue to do the right thing. Start small. It's extremely important because those little wins build momentum, which is also extremely important internally. You don't want to constantly feel defeated, right? So you do need to set some small, low-hanging fruit goals, but you also do need to look at long-term big picture goals simultaneously. And there's so many ways now to engage with our customers and storytell. And so I just think it's just about being honest and upfront from the beginning.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to kind of backtrack since we've discussed leather. There's a few people here, Sherry, some other attendees who are asking questions about silk. We've got a specific question here about washed silk. Yeah, another one about washed silk. And I heard Eszter discussing silk before we got started. So do you have anything you want to discuss in terms of sourcing silk and sustainable options?
So again, I think here it's very important not to drop one material completely out of your supply chain without fully understanding the impacts. And again, there is so much to learn at where the impacts come in each material. Is it coming at the sourcing level? Is it coming at the processing level? Is it coming at the dyeing level? Is it coming because the source of the material and the facilities that you work with are far apart? You know, is it nuanced in that way? So there are so many places where impact can come. And so being able to compare a material that's processed in one way and what the outcomes are there to that same material processed in a different way and what the outcomes are there, you really, again, just have to know what the impacts are so you can make an educated decision. So I will not speak specifically to whether silk is good or not good. I will, perhaps somebody else could field that one. But again, before cutting any one material out of your supply chain, replacing it with something else, turning to something else, you really have to know what role each material plays in your own material portfolio and your overall goals. And you have to have trusted, verified data in order to be able to do that.
I wanted to add the thing, thanks. I agree with Dana and Eszter, and we make silk. We make silk in Afghanistan. I'll just tell you a story. Silk can be incredible if properly made. First of all, silk is about working with farmers, with the seeds and with the cocoons. So producing the worms, enabling the worms to grow well, eating the mulberry tree leaves, and then they produce the cocoon. If you do this in an organic setting without pesticides, this is already a great contribution towards the decarbonization of this material. The mulberry tree is a virtuous tree. It sequestrates a lot of carbon. It has a strong capacity of carbon sequestration. and the leaves are eaten by the worms. And at the same time, it's a tree which is wind resisting, and it's used to surround the fields where you grow your other stuffs in the rural areas, and it protects the fields from the dust. Where we work in Afghanistan, we grow silk where we grow saffron, because in the same fields, you have the mulberry trees protecting the fields, you have the saffron growing in the fields, and you have the possibility to rear those worms and to produce the cocoons using the leaves of the mulberry tree. And you have a virtuous circle of carbon sequestration, of organic things, and of use of water. It's an incredible way also to save water. Then it comes the transformation of the cocoon, and there you have water, and there you have the flies, the butterflies, because in traditional transformation, the worm is killed, the cocoon is boiled, and the poor worm dies, so it doesn't become a butterfly. Vegan silk is silk that waits for the worm to become a butterfly and to fly away, and you remain with the cocoon, but the cocoon is damaged. You know, the incredible thing of silk is that it's the worm that produces the long yarn. When the cocoon is broken by the butterfly, this yarn is broken, and you have to reattach it together. So the kind of silk you can make in that way is different and is a bit more rough than the conventional one. But then you have this incredible yarn in a way or another, and you don't have to spin it. You reel it, you couple and cross it together until you achieve the final one. And then you have all the processing of dyeing and all the rest. We use natural dyes. But this story tells you one thing. There are many ways to do silk. There are ways that are consistent with Mother Nature, and Eszter is right. You shouldn't put out of the window a material because there is almost always a good way to make things. You have to know how this silk was made. Silk is long lasting. Silk can be reused, repurposed. We use a lot of silk shawls that are 40 years old to line bags or to line incredible pieces of garment. And they are beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. I have pieces, I have shawls that have my age. I'm 56, and they look new. They're beautiful. Silk is also long lasting. Again, this is to tell you about the complexity of this supply chain, but also the beauty of this material.
Thank you so much. You have such a great energy, Simone. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and there are so many incredible questions. But Nusha is asking a very broad question, which I think is a great way for each of our panelists to finish up on. Maybe in a minute, what recommendations for small businesses who just started on their path to sustainability do you have? Dana, do you want to get us started? And then everyone, we will have a moment for contact information. I know a bunch of you are asking for that. So just bear with us and we'll finish with that.
So Mary, sorry, is that just some ways for brands to just get started? Is that the
yeah. How can small brands get started on their path to sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think where we started off the panel, right, with asking different questions, right? So getting to know your suppliers, coming up with that material portfolio, putting together your sourcing and manufacturing strategy. Also kind of looking at internal, like company culture. What are things that you could shift internally to ensure that there's buy-in amongst your employees? And then kind of figuring out what are your pillars, or what are the things that feel the most important to you as a brand and as an organization to keep yourself really focused, and defining the word sustainability, right? I mean, at this point, it's used so loosely, and I think it's very important for the brand to identify that. It's never too late to get started, right? I think I also mentioned the low-hanging fruit, I think is extremely important, right? So what kind of quick shifts can you make to have those quick wins wins, but also looking at those long-term goals, and also engaging your customer. If there's any way to tap into what it is that they want to see from you as a brand, what are they interested in, and how can you continue to explore that? Working side by side with your manufacturing partners. I mean, it's endless, right? We talked about materiality, using what already exists, dead stock, Queen of Raw, great resource, right? If you're looking to source dead stock materials that exist. I think I saw in the questions people asking about more recycled materials, using Fashiondex as a resource for manufacturers. Also, the CFDA has an open source guide there, doing your research. When we were in this space 6 years ago, we literally stalked, called every brand who has been leading the charge for much longer than us, and figuring out how they could support us. Getting to know the industry organizations that exist, right? You have Eszter here from SAC. There's so many other ones that exist, Textile Exchange, Fashion Positive. There's just so many things that you want to get to know what people are doing, and keep yourself educated, and know that, you know, you can't do it all, right? But you've got to start somewhere.
Thank you, Dana. That was filled with resources and great ways for anyone here to get started on their journey to sustainable thinking. Andrea, do you have any final notes you'd like to?
Yes, I want to leave with a final question, as well as if you want to have a quick fire answer to something a new company can do, and you wanted to talk about that. But otherwise, if you either advice to a new company wanting to move to become more of a sustainable company, or just share with us, if you could each share what keeps you optimistic, inspired, and excited about the future, right? There's a lot of pessimism around us right now. There's a lot of, I talk to students, so I know there's despair. What keeps you hopeful? And if you could answer in about a minute each, tops, please, as well as how people can find you. And Eszter, you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is so much to be excited about, even though if you care about the environment, it can be really hard not to wake up every morning and be like, oh gosh, this is terrible. So even though large scale progress can feel slow, it's really important to keep your eyes on the big picture. And there's an incredible amount of sustainability work underway right now, and it's real work. It's real work that's geared toward developing strong sustainability foundations. I think companies are really realizing that there are no quick fixes when it comes to walking the talk of sustainability, and that it's going to take a lot of resources and time invested. But I think a lot of companies with big footprints are ready to do that. So just to give one quick example of why we should stay optimistic, it's so encouraging to me that in 2020, the year of a global pandemic and a global financial crisis, we at SAC had a record number of new members join. So we had 58 companies join just last year, and all of these new members are showing up. They are here to do the work. They're here to commit to our really stringent requirements. They're here to get to know their supply chains in a different way and to change those relationships. And they're doing all of this with perhaps budgets that have been hit pretty hard by the financial crisis, and teams that are potentially very small due to company restructuring. So for me, it's incredibly inspiring to see that the work is getting done, even in the face of so many obstacles, and that the new work being done is real work with a smart and a solid foundation.
Thanks, Eszter. And how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, absolutely. So please, you can go to apparelcoalition.org to learn more about the SAC. You can contact me directly at Eszter@apparelcoalition.org, Eszter with a Z, and definitely happy to talk to anyone who'd like to explore membership or the Higg Index or just chat about sustainability.
Thanks, Eszter. Simone.
I'm an optimist because of our common humanity. The human nature is such that sooner or later engages for the better. It's not to be taken for granted. It's not automatic, but we know that humans, we have the capacity to do it. I work in war-torn countries. I work in Afghanistan. I work in places where there is an insurgency, violence, and all the rest. And I should be pessimistic, but I am not. I am not. Those who don't believe in it are those who try to repudiate our common humanity through indifference, through racism, through inequality, through violence. These are all forms of repudiation of our common humanity, but our common humanity is what will save us. Being aware of that is what will really take us towards the right direction. I repeat, it's not to be taken for granted, but we really have a chance to do it. And then a final thing, do good. Do good in your life, in your daily life, in small things, do good. And don't think about, hey, about the good I have to do tomorrow, what will I do in a month's time? Do good today. That's enough. Then tomorrow is another day. You will think about that. Boom. www.ethicalfashioninitiative.org.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Dana, any last words of what keeps you optimistic?
I feel like it was already touched on, but it's exciting. The space is growing rapidly, and to see the innovations that I've been following for years finally coming to scale, and to see the institutions teaching this to the young people and my children who are in climate classes in elementary school. It's a time, things are changing, and it's exciting. And I too am optimistic, and I believe that with conversations like this, to continue them, we can get there.
Yes, awesome. And then Mary, tell everyone where they can contact you, and then I'll end with a final goodbye and message for our panelists, for our attendees.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm so incredibly inspired to see over 140 people come together to seek sustainable solutions in the fashion industry. This has been wonderful, and I would love to connect with all of you. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Mary Harrelson. You can find it in my little video box. So I look forward to talking with you all, and thank you for letting me participate.
And thank you everyone for joining us at our 6th, I believe, Sustainable Fashion Forum. You will all receive a video link. So I know that was a question that appeared a few times. So if you missed something and stepped away to get coffee, don't worry. And we truly apologize if we didn't get to all your questions, and we'll try to answer them all and send that in a separate email. So you know, and I just want to let you know, I'm optimistic too. We created this linear system of fashion. We designed it, and we have the capacity to design something better, and we're working on it. So thank you so much, and we wish you a wonderful and sustainable day. Keep in touch.